I worked for 40 years as a nanny. After finally buying a $350,000 house, my son sold it without my permission. I need the money to give my wife a future. I was left with nothing. I just smiled. I was already prepared for this day. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. I'm 60 years old, and I've spent 40 years of my life taking care of other people's children. 40 years of getting up at 5 in the morning, making breakfast for families who could afford things I could only dream of. Watching their babies take their first steps, hearing their first words. 40 years of putting my own life on hold so that other people could live theirs. But the one thing that kept me going, the one dream that sustained me through all those early mornings and sleepless nights when sick children needed comfort, was the day I'd finally have something of my own. A place where I could rest, where I could be proud of what I'd accomplished with my own hands, my own work. That dream came true 3 years ago when I bought my house. Not a mansion, not something fancy, but a real home with 3 bedrooms and a little garden where I could grow tomatoes and roses. $350,000 I'd saved, penny by penny, dollar by dollar, over decades of careful living and sacrifice. I remember the day I got the keys. I was 57 and I cried right there in the real estate office. The agent probably thought I was losing my mind, but those were tears of pure joy. Finally I had something that belonged to me. Something that proved that all those years of work, all those missed opportunities had been worth it. Jason was so proud of me that day. My son, my only child, the boy I'd raised alone after his father died when he was just 8 years old. He helped me move in, painted the kitchen walls the soft yellow I'd always wanted, and even planted those first rose bushes in my garden. "Mom, you deserve this," he told me, his arm around my shoulders as we stood in my new living room. "You worked so hard for this. I'm proud of you." I should have known then that something was wrong. Jason hadn't talked to me like that in years, not since he married Hannah 5 years ago. My daughter-in-law had a way of making Jason see me differently, like I was some kind of burden instead of the woman who'd sacrificed everything to give him a good life. But that day, I chose to believe that my son still loved me, that maybe Hannah was finally softening toward me. I was such a fool. The truth came crashing down on me 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. I was in my kitchen making coffee and planning my day when Jason called. "Mom, we need to talk. Hannah and I are coming over." Something in his voice made my stomach clench. He sounded formal, distant, the way he talked to people he was trying to keep at arm's length. But I pushed the feeling aside and told him I'd make lunch. They arrived at noon, and I knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. Hannah walked into my house like she owned it, her eyes scanning my living room with a calculating look I'd seen before when she was evaluating things she wanted. Jason wouldn't meet my eyes at all. "Sit down, Mom," Jason said, his voice tight. "We have something important to discuss." I sat on my favorite armchair, the one I'd bought secondhand, and reupholstered myself in soft blue fabric. Hannah perched on the edge of my sofa like she was afraid of getting dirty, and Jason paced by the window. "The thing is," Jason began, then stopped, running his hands through his hair. "The thing is, Mom, Hannah and I have been talking, and we think it's time for you to downsize." My heart started beating faster. "Downsize?" Hannah leaned forward, her smile sweet but her eyes cold. "Ruth, honey, you're getting older. This house is too big for you, too much work. You don't need 3 bedrooms when it's just you here." "But I love this house," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I worked 40 years to buy it." Jason finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes made my blood turn to ice. Guilt, yes, but also something harder. Determination. "Mom, Hannah's pregnant." The words hit me like a physical blow. Pregnant. They were having another baby, their 3rd child, and somehow this was supposed to explain why I needed to give up my home. "That's wonderful news," I managed to say, though my mouth felt like cotton. "Congratulations." "We need the money, Mom," Jason said, the words tumbling out fast like he was afraid he'd lose his nerve. "The equity in this house, it could give us the foundation we need. Hannah wants to be a stay-at-home mom with the new baby, and my salary alone isn't enough for the kind of life we want to give our children." I stared at him, this man who used to be my little boy, who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to tell me I was the best mom in the whole world. "You want me to sell my house?" "We already did," Hannah said, her voice matter of fact. The papers were signed yesterday. The new owners take possession next month. The world tilted sideways. I gripped the arms of my chair, feeling like I might faint. You sold my house? I'm on the deed, Mom, Jason said, his voice defensive now. You put my name on it 2 years ago, remember? When you were worried about what would happen if you got sick. I did remember. I'd added Jason to the deed because I loved him, because I trusted him, because I wanted to make sure that if something happened to me, he'd inherit the house without any legal complications. I never imagined he'd use that trust to steal my home right out from under me. Where am I supposed to live? The question came out small and broken. We found you a nice little apartment, Hannah said, pulling out her phone and showing me pictures. 1 bedroom, very manageable. The rent is only $800 a month. $800. After living in my own home, my dream home, they wanted me to pay rent to live in a box. I worked for 40 years, I said, my voice getting stronger with each word. I saved every penny I could. I bought this house with my own money. Mom, don't be dramatic, Jason said. And he sounded exactly like his father when he was trying to end an argument. You'll get your share of the money. We're not stealing from you. My share. I laughed, but it came out harsh and bitter. It's my house, Jason. I should get all of it. Hannah's mask slipped for just a second, and I saw the real her underneath. The calculating, greedy woman who'd been working on this plan for months, maybe years. Ruth, you're 60 years old. How many more years do you really have left to enjoy money? Jason and I are young, we have our whole lives ahead of us. We have children to raise, a future to build. You've already lived your life. The cruelty of it took my breath away. I've already lived my life. As if the next 20 or 30 years didn't matter. As if I was already dead and just taking up space. But as I sat there, looking at my son and the woman who'd poisoned him against me, something strange happened. Instead of falling apart, instead of begging or crying or pleading with them to reconsider, I felt a calm settle over me. I smiled. Well, I said, my voice steady and quiet, I suppose you have it all figured out. Jason looked relieved, like he'd expected me to fight more. Hannah looked suspicious, like she couldn't believe I was giving in so easily. Neither of them knew that I'd been prepared for this day for 3 weeks already. Because you see, I knew about their plan long before they told me. I'd seen the real estate documents in Jason's car, when I borrowed it to go grocery shopping 2 months ago. I'd heard Hannah on the phone with her sister, laughing about how easy it was going to be to get the old lady to go along with their scheme. I knew, and I'd been preparing. As I watched my son and his wife congratulate themselves on their successful manipulation, I thought about the phone calls I'd made, the documents I'd gathered, the quiet conversations I'd had with people who owed me favors from my 4 decades as a trusted babysitter to some very powerful families. They thought they were so clever, taking advantage of a tired old woman who had nowhere else to turn. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. After Jason and Hannah left that day, I sat in my favorite armchair for a long time, staring at the walls I'd painted with such hope 3 years ago. The afternoon sun was streaming through my kitchen window, hitting the little herb garden I'd planted on the windowsill. Basil, rosemary, thyme. Simple things that made me happy. I should have been devastated. Any normal person would have been crying, calling friends, maybe even calling a lawyer. But I wasn't normal, not anymore. 40 years of taking care of other people's children had taught me that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who smile while they stab you in the back. And I'd learned something else in those 40 years. Information is power. Patience is a weapon. And love, when it's one-sided, can be the most dangerous emotion of all. My mind drifted back to 3 weeks earlier, to the moment that had changed everything. I'd been visiting Jason and Hannah for Sunday dinner, something I did every few weeks even though the atmosphere was always tense. Hannah had a way of making little comments that cut just deep enough to hurt but not deep enough for Jason to notice. Ruth, you should really think about doing something with your hair, she'd said that day, her voice honey-sweet. At your age, you want to look put together, you know? I was 60 years old, not 90, but Hannah had a way of making me feel ancient, like I was already 1 foot in the grave. After dinner, I'd offered to help clean up, but Hannah waved me away. Just relax, Ruth. You've done enough. The dismissal stung, but I was used to it. I went to sit in their living room, and that's when I heard them in the kitchen. They thought I couldn't hear, but after 4 decades of listening for sick children in the middle of the night, my hearing was better than they realized. Did you talk to the real estate agent? Hannah's voice low and urgent. Not yet. I'm still not sure about this, Hannah. It's her house. She worked so hard for it. Jason, we've been over this. She's 60 years old. How much longer is she going to live there? 10 years? 15 at most? And then what? The house sits empty while we struggle to give our kids the life they deserve. But she loves that house. She'll get over it. Old people are resilient, that's what they're good at. Besides, we're not stealing from her. She'll get her share of the money. Her share. Of her own house. What if she says no? Hannah's laugh was cold. She won't. Where else is she going to go? Who else does she have? We're her only family, Jason. She needs us more than we need her. I'd sat there in their living room, listening to them plan the theft of everything I'd worked for, and something inside me had died. Not my heart, not exactly. But the part of me that still believed my son loved me, that still hoped we could be a real family again. That was the night I started preparing. The next morning I'd called my old friend Margaret, who'd worked as a housekeeper for the Whitmore family for 30 years. Margaret knew everyone in the wealthy circles of our city, knew all the secrets, all the connections. Ruthie, she'd said when I explained what I'd overheard. I'm so sorry, honey, but I'm not surprised. That Hannah never sat right with me. Margaret had given me the first piece of information I needed. Hannah's father, it turned out, had some very interesting business dealings. Nothing illegal necessarily, but the kind of gray area investments that wouldn't look good in the society pages. Then I'd called Patricia, who'd been the nanny for the Morrison family when I was working for the Whitmores. Patricia had moved to Arizona 5 years ago, but she still kept in touch with her old employers. The Morrison boy is running for city council now, Patricia had told me. His mother is very concerned about the family image. Any hint of scandal could ruin his chances. Piece by piece, I'd started building my arsenal. You see, when you spend 40 years in people's homes, you learn things. You overhear phone calls, you see documents left on kitchen counters. You witness fights that the neighbors never know about. Most of the time you forget these things or push them to the back of your mind because they're not your business. But sometimes, when your own family decides to destroy you, those forgotten memories become very useful indeed. I'd worked for the Harrison family for 8 years, from the time their daughter Emma was 2 until she was 10. During those years, I'd seen Mr. Harrison's business trips that were really weekend getaways with his secretary. I'd watched Mrs. Harrison drink herself into a stupor every afternoon, then magically recover in time for the children to come home from school. The Harrisons were now pillars of the community. Mr. Harrison was a prominent lawyer. Mrs. Harrison ran charity events for the country club. Emma had grown up to marry well and have beautiful children of her own. They would not want certain information about their family life to become public knowledge. I'd also worked for the Blackwood family, old money with a reputation to maintain. During my 5 years with them, I'd learned that their fortune wasn't quite as old as they claimed, and that Mr. Blackwood's grandfather had made some very questionable deals during the Depression. The Blackwoods were now major donors to several political campaigns, including that of young Morrison, who was running for city council. It had taken me 2 weeks to gather all the information I needed, to make the right phone calls, to plant the right seeds. And then I'd sat back and waited. The call had come on a Monday morning, exactly 1 week before Jason and Hannah showed up at my house with their devastating news. Ruth? This is Elena Morrison. Elena Morrison, the matriarch of one of the most powerful families in our city. A woman whose word could make or break reputations, whose approval was sought by everyone who mattered in our social circles. Mrs. Morrison, what a lovely surprise. Ruth dear, I hope you don't mind me calling. Patricia mentioned that you might be facing some family difficulties. I'd been careful with Patricia, hadn't given her all the details, just enough to get the ball rolling. I'm managing, Mrs. Morrison. These things happen. Indeed they do. Ruth, I wonder if you might be free for lunch this Thursday? I have a proposition that might interest you. A proposition? From Elena Morrison. I'd be honored, Mrs. Morrison. Wonderful. There's a young woman I'd like you to meet as well. Hannah Carson, I believe her married name is now. She's been quite persistent about making connections in our social circle. I thought you might have some insights about her character. My heart had started beating faster. They knew. Somehow they already knew about Hannah and Jason's plan. I'd be happy to share my thoughts, Mrs. Morrison. Excellent. I'll have my driver pick you up at noon. That lunch had been 3 days ago. Just 4 days before Jason and Hannah came to steal my house. Elena Morrison was in her 70s, silver-haired and elegant, with the kind of presence that made waiters stand up straighter and other diners lower their voices. She treated me not like the hired help, but like an equal, asking about my health, my interests, my plans for the future. Ruth, she'd said over our salad course, I understand your son has made some rather poor decisions lately. I'm afraid so, Mrs. Morrison. And his wife has been quite ambitious about social climbing. She's been trying to arrange playdates between her children and the grandchildren of several prominent families. I'd stayed quiet, letting her talk. The thing about social climbing, Ruth, is that it requires a certain foundation of character. Trust. Reliability. The kind of qualities that come from good breeding and proper values. She'd paused, sipping her wine delicately. People who would steal from their own elderly parents, for example, lack those essential qualities. The words had hung in the air between us like a sword about to fall. I quite agree, Mrs. Morrison. I thought you might. Now, Ruth, tell me about your housing situation. By the end of that lunch, I'd known exactly how this was going to play out. Elena Morrison hadn't gotten specific about what she planned to do, but she'd made it clear that Hannah's social ambitions were about to hit a very solid wall. And as for me? Well, Mrs. Morrison had some very interesting ideas about how a woman of my experience and discretion might be useful to certain families in need of trustworthy domestic help. There's a lovely carriage house on the Pemberton estate, she'd mentioned casually. It's been empty for months. 3 bedrooms, beautiful garden, very private. The Pembertons have been looking for the right person to occupy it. Someone who could provide a sense of security and continuity for the property. 3 bedrooms. A garden. And the Pemberton estate was one of the most beautiful properties in the city. That sounds wonderful, Mrs. Morrison. Of course, the right person would need to be someone of unquestionable character. Someone who's proven their loyalty and discretion over many years of service to prominent families. Someone like me. So when Jason and Hannah had walked into my house 3 days later with their smug faces and their carefully rehearsed speeches, I'd been ready. I'd sat in my favorite blue armchair, listening to them explain how they were stealing everything I'd worked for, and I'd smiled, because I knew something they didn't know. Their carefully laid plans were about to crumble into dust, and I was going to be just fine. Better than fine, actually. I was going to be free. The moving truck arrived on a gray Thursday morning, exactly 4 weeks after Jason and Hannah had delivered their devastating news. I stood in my kitchen, sipping my coffee and watching through the window as 2 men in uniform unloaded boxes from their truck. My boxes. My life packed away like I was already dead. Jason was there, of course, supervising the move with the kind of efficiency that made my stomach turn. He'd always been organized, even as a child, but now that attention to detail was being used to erase me from my own home. Hannah stood on my front porch, clipboard in hand, checking items off a list. She'd insisted on being there to make sure nothing got damaged, but I knew the real reason. She wanted to watch my humiliation. She wanted to see the moment when I finally broke down and admitted defeat. She was going to be disappointed. I opened my front door and stepped outside, wearing my best dress and the pearl earrings I'd bought myself for my 60th birthday. If I was going to be evicted from my own home, I was going to do it with dignity. "Morning, Mom," Jason said, not quite meeting my eyes. "The movers said they should have everything loaded by noon." "That's fine, dear," I replied, my voice calm and pleasant. "I've already packed a bag for tonight. I'll be staying at the Riverside Inn until I can get settled in my new apartment." Hannah looked up from her clipboard, a small frown creasing her perfect forehead. "The Riverside Inn? Ruth, that's expensive. Wouldn't a motel be more practical?" I smiled at her, the same smile I'd given to difficult children during my babysitting years. Patient, understanding, completely unruffled. "I think I can manage one night at a decent hotel, Hannah. After 40 years of work, I believe I deserve a comfortable bed and room service for my last evening as a homeowner." The word last hung in the air like a small barb, just sharp enough to make Jason wince. Good. I wanted him to feel at least a little bit guilty about what he was doing. "Mom, you know this is for the best," he said, the words sounding rehearsed. The apartment Hannah found is really nice. Very convenient. Close to shopping and the bus line. The bus line. Because at 60, I was apparently too old to be trusted with a car or a house or any of the other things that made life worth living. I'm sure it will be lovely, I said, and I meant it. Because by the time I saw that apartment, it would be Hannah and Jason who were desperate for convenient bus transportation. One of the movers approached us, a burly man with kind eyes who reminded me of my late husband. "Ma'am, we're ready to load the furniture now. Is there anything special you want us to be careful with?" I thought about my blue armchair, the one I'd reupholstered myself, where I'd spent so many quiet evenings reading or just thinking. I thought about the little kitchen table where I'd eaten my meals alone but content, planning my days and enjoying my independence. "Just treat everything with respect," I said. "These pieces have been good to me." The mover nodded, his expression softening. He'd probably done this before, helped elderly people lose their homes to greedy relatives. It was more common than most people wanted to admit. As the morning progressed, I played my role perfectly. I thanked Jason for his help. I complimented Hannah on her organizational skills. I made small talk with the movers about the weather and traffic. I was the picture of gracious resignation, an old woman accepting her fate with quiet dignity. But inside I was counting down the hours. At 11:30 my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and felt a familiar flutter of satisfaction. Elena Morrison. "Excuse me," I said to Hannah, who was hovering nearby. "I should take this." I walked to the edge of my property, far enough away that they couldn't hear my conversation. "Good morning, Mrs. Morrison. Ruth dear, how are you holding up?" "I'm managing quite well, thank you." "Excellent. I wanted to let you know that everything is proceeding exactly as planned. Hannah Carson received some very disappointing news yesterday evening." My heart jumped, but I kept my voice level. "Oh. It seems that several families have decided they're not comfortable with playdates between their children and hers. Something about questionable family values. You know how these things spread through our community." I did know. In circles like Elena Morrison's, reputation was everything, and once doubt was planted, it grew like weeds. "That's unfortunate for the children," I said carefully. "Indeed. And I'm afraid Jason's job prospects may be similarly affected. His current employer has some very strict policies about employee conduct, particularly regarding family matters and ethical behavior. Jason worked for a mid-sized accounting firm that prided itself on traditional values and community involvement. If word got out that he'd stolen his elderly mother's house, these things have a way of working themselves out," I said. "They certainly do. Oh, and Ruth? The carriage house is ready whenever you are. Mrs. Pemberton is quite looking forward to meeting you." After I hung up, I stood there for a moment looking at my house. My beautiful house with its yellow kitchen and rose garden and memories of 3 years of genuine happiness. In a few hours it would belong to strangers and Jason and Hannah would have their money. But money wasn't everything. They were about to learn that lesson the hard way. "Mom!" Jason's voice came from behind me. "Everything okay?" I turned around and smiled at him. My son who'd grown up to be a stranger, who'd chosen the woman he'd married over the mother who'd raised him alone. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just an old friend checking on me." By 12:15 the moving truck was loaded and gone. Jason and Hannah stood in my empty living room, looking around at the bare walls and scuffed hardwood floors. "Well," Hannah said, her voice bright with satisfaction, "that went smoothly. The cleaning service will be here this afternoon," Jason added. "The new owners take possession next week." I nodded, pulling my purse over my shoulder and picking up my small suitcase. Everything else I owned was in storage now, waiting for me to decide what I could fit into a one-bedroom apartment. "I guess that's everything then," I said. Jason stepped forward and for a moment I thought he might hug me. Instead, he held out an envelope. "This is your share of the sale, Mom, after the realtor fees and closing costs." I took the envelope without opening it. Inside was probably a check for $50,000 or $60,000. A fraction of what the house was worth, but enough to make Jason feel like he wasn't completely robbing me. "Thank you," I said simply. Hannah was watching me carefully, suspicion flickering in her eyes. "Ruth, you're being awfully calm about this. I thought you might be more upset." I looked at her, this woman who'd spent 5 years trying to push me out of my son's life, and I gave her my most genuine smile. Hannah dear, at my age, you learn to accept the things you can't change. Fighting against fate is exhausting, and I'm too old to waste energy on battles I can't win. She relaxed visibly, satisfied that she'd broken me, that I was admitting defeat. That's very wise of you, she said patronizingly. I've always tried to be practical, I replied. Speaking of which, I should be getting to the hotel. I have a long day ahead of me tomorrow, looking at apartments and getting my new life organized. Jason walked me to the door, and this time he did hug me, a brief, awkward embrace that felt like a goodbye. Take care of yourself, Mom, he said. Oh, I will, I assured him. I'm very good at taking care of myself. As I drove away from my house for the last time, I caught a glimpse of Hannah and Jason in my rearview mirror. They were standing in the driveway, probably congratulating themselves on how easy it had been, how well they'd handled the difficult situation of disposing of an inconvenient elderly relative. They had no idea that their problems were just beginning. The Riverside Inn was exactly as elegant as I remembered from the few special occasions I'd splurged on dinner in their restaurant. The lobby was decorated in soft blues and golds, with fresh flowers on every table, and the kind of quiet luxury that made you feel important just by walking through the door. I checked in and went up to my room, a suite with a view of the river and a bottle of champagne waiting on ice. Mrs. Morrison's doing, no doubt. I opened the champagne and poured myself a glass, then sat by the window watching the sunset paint the water gold and pink. Tomorrow Jason and Hannah would start receiving some very unpleasant phone calls. Tomorrow their perfect plan would begin to unravel. But tonight, I was going to enjoy my champagne and order room service and sleep in clean sheets that someone else would wash in the morning. Because you see, Hannah had gotten one thing right. At my age, I had learned to be practical. And the most practical thing I'd ever done was spend 40 years earning the trust and loyalty of people who had real power in this world. People who didn't like to see their friends mistreated. People who were about to make Jason and Hannah very, very sorry. I woke up in the Riverside Inn to the sound of rain pattering against my window, and my phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand. The digital clock read 7:32 in the morning, which seemed early for social calls, but I'd learned over the years that important conversations rarely waited for convenient times. The caller ID made me smile. Margaret, my old friend from the Whitmore household. Good morning, Margaret. Ruthie, honey, you need to turn on channel 7. Right now. I fumbled for the remote, my heart starting to race. What's happening? Just turn it on. The morning news. The television flickered to life, showing a perfectly groomed news anchor sitting behind a glossy desk. I caught the tail end of a story about city budget concerns, then a commercial for car insurance, before the anchor returned with a more serious expression. In local business news, Hartwell and Associates accounting firm announced yesterday that they would be conducting a comprehensive review of their employee policies regarding ethical conduct and family values. The review comes after allegations surfaced about inappropriate behavior by several staff members. My breath caught in my throat. Hartwell and Associates, Jason's firm. The firm's senior partner, Richard Hartwell, issued a statement saying that the company has always prided itself on maintaining the highest standards of personal and professional integrity among its employees. Any staff members found to be in violation of these standards may face disciplinary action up to and including termination. The story moved on to sports scores, but I kept staring at the screen, hardly believing what I just heard. Did you catch that? Margaret's voice brought me back to the present. I caught it. How did you? Elena Morrison has a lot of friends, honey, and some of them have a lot of influence. Richard Hartwell's wife plays bridge with Elena every Thursday. Apparently, their conversation yesterday was very enlightening. I sank back against the hotel pillows, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and something that might have been guilt. Jason was about to lose his job because of me, because of information I'd helped spread through the social networks of wealthy women who had nothing better to do than gossip about people who disappointed them. But then I remembered the look on his face when he'd told me they'd already sold my house. The casual cruelty in Hannah's voice when she'd said I'd already lived my life. The guilt faded quickly. There's more, Margaret continued. Elena called me this morning. Apparently Hannah's been trying to get her oldest boy into the Riverside Academy preschool program. The Riverside Academy was the most exclusive private school in the city, where the children of senators and CEOs learned their letters alongside trust fund babies and old money science. I'm guessing that's not going to happen now. The admissions director is Elena's goddaughter. Hannah's application was rejected yesterday afternoon. Something about the family not being a good fit for their community values. I closed my eyes thinking about Hannah's children. They were innocent in all of this, caught between their parents' greed and their grandmother's need for justice. Margaret, the children shouldn't suffer for their parents' mistakes. Oh honey, don't you worry about that. Elena's not cruel, just effective. The boy will get into a good school, just not the one his mama was bragging about to all her friends. Sometimes a little humility is good for everyone. After I hung up with Margaret, I sat in the quiet hotel room, thinking about the complicated web of relationships and obligations that had brought me to this point. For 40 years, I'd been the invisible woman in other people's homes, the trusted caregiver who knew where the family secrets were buried but never spoke of them. I'd seen marriages fall apart over affairs that everyone pretended not to notice. I'd watched children struggle with parents who were too busy or too selfish to give them the attention they needed. I'd been the keeper of so many confidences, so many whispered phone calls and midnight arguments that the families themselves probably forgot I'd witnessed. But I never forgot. And more importantly, I'd never forgotten which families treated me with respect, and which ones saw me as nothing more than hired help. The Whitmores had been different. During my 15 years with them, taking care of their daughter Sarah while both parents worked demanding jobs, they'd always included me in family celebrations, always asked about my life, always treated me like a valued member of their household rather than a piece of furniture. When Sarah was diagnosed with a learning disability at age 8, Mrs. Whitmore had cried in my arms, terrified about what the future would hold for her daughter. "Ruth, I don't know what we'd do without you," she'd said that day. "You see Sarah for who she really is, not just her limitations." I'd stayed with the Whitmores until Sarah turned 18 and went off to a specialized college program. At my retirement party, Mr. Whitmore had given me a beautiful watch and Mrs. Whitmore had pressed a letter into my hands. "Don't open this until you really need it," she'd said, her eyes serious. "Promise me." I'd carried that letter in my jewelry box for 12 years, never opening it, sometimes forgetting it was there. But 3 weeks ago, when I'd started planning my response to Jason and Hannah's betrayal, I'd remembered it. The letter had contained exactly what I'd hoped it would. A detailed account of information I'd shared with the Whitmores over the years, information about other families in their social circle, information that could be very damaging if it fell into the wrong hands. But more than that, it had contained Mrs. Whitmore's promise to help me if I ever needed it, along with contact information for several people who owed the Whitmore family favors. Elena Morrison had been at the top of that list. "Ruth has been like family to us for 15 years, Mrs. Whitmore had written. "She has kept our confidences and protected our privacy through some very difficult times. If she ever needs assistance, I hope you will remember the debt our community owes to women like her, who dedicate their lives to caring for others." The letter had been my insurance policy, though I'd never expected to need it. Now, sitting in my hotel room watching the rain streak down the windows, I thought about all the other letters I could have written, all the other secrets I could have revealed. The Harrison family's drinking problems and marital infidelities, the Blackwood family's questionable financial history, the Morrison family's own carefully hidden scandals from years past. But I wasn't interested in destroying innocent people. I was only interested in protecting myself from the two people who decided I was disposable. My phone rang again, interrupting my thoughts. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello, Mrs. Miller? This is Janet Pemberton. Elena Morrison gave me your number." Janet Pemberton, wife of the pharmaceutical fortune heir, owner of one of the most beautiful estates in the county. "Mrs. Pemberton, what a pleasure. Elena tells me you might be interested in seeing our carriage house. Would today be convenient? I know you're between residences at the moment." Between residences. Such a polite way of saying that my son had stolen my home. Today would be perfect. Wonderful. Shall we say 2 o'clock? I'll send my driver to collect you from the Riverside Inn. After I hung up, I spent a long time staring at myself in the hotel mirror. 60 years old, gray hair that I kept neat but not fashionable, lines around my eyes that spoke of decades of worry and work. I looked like exactly what I was. An aging woman who'd spent her life taking care of other people. But I was also something else, something that Hannah and Jason had never understood. I was a woman with friends in high places, friends who remembered kindnesses and repaid debts, friends who understood that loyalty was a rare and valuable commodity. At exactly 2 o'clock, a black car with tinted windows pulled up to the hotel entrance. The driver, a kind-faced man in his 50s, held the door open for me with the sort of respect I hadn't experienced in years. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Miller. I'm Thomas. Mrs. Pemberton is looking forward to meeting you." The Pemberton estate was everything I'd imagined and more. Rolling lawns dotted with ancient oak trees, gardens that looked like they belonged in a magazine, and at the heart of it all, a mansion that managed to be both grand and welcoming. The carriage house sat about 100 yards from the main house, connected by a winding stone path lined with roses. It was painted a soft cream color with dark green shutters, and it looked like something from a fairy tale. Janet Pemberton met me at the front door, and I immediately understood why Elena Morrison had spoken of her with such respect. She was probably in her early 60s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and the kind of confident bearing that came from a lifetime of privilege used wisely. "Ruth, I'm so glad to meet you. Elena has told me wonderful things about you." The tour of the carriage house took my breath away. 3 bedrooms, just as Mrs. Morrison had promised, with gleaming hardwood floors and windows that looked out over the estate's gardens. A kitchen with granite countertops and modern appliances. A living room with a stone fireplace and built-in bookshelves. "The previous tenant was my husband's aunt," Mrs. Pemberton explained as we walked through the master bedroom, which was larger than the entire apartment Hannah had picked out for me. "She lived here for 20 years until she passed last spring. We've been looking for the right person to take care of the property, someone who would appreciate what she built here." We ended the tour on a screened porch that overlooked a small herb garden, the same kinds of plants I'd grown in my kitchen window, basil and rosemary and thyme. "Elena mentioned that you have some experience with gardening," Mrs. Pemberton said with a smile. "A little. I find it peaceful." "So do I. Ruth, I'll be direct with you. Elena told me about your situation, about what your son has done. I want you to know that in my opinion, family should be a source of support, not exploitation." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "The rent on this property is $500 per month, utilities included. You'd have complete privacy, but you'd also be part of our extended household family. We host dinner parties occasionally, and we travel frequently. Having someone trustworthy on the property gives us peace of mind." $500. Less than the tiny apartment Hannah had found for me. "Mrs. Pemberton, that's incredibly generous. It's practical. Good people are hard to find, Ruth. Women like you who understand loyalty and discretion, who know how to take care of things properly. You're becoming rare." As Thomas drove me back to the hotel, I sat in the back seat feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope? Not just hope for survival, but hope for something better. Something that might actually resemble the happiness I dreamed of when I'd bought my little house 3 years ago. My phone buzzed with a text message as we pulled into the hotel parking lot. It was from Jason. "Mom, can you call me? Something's happened at work and I could really use your advice." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some bridges once burned couldn't be rebuilt, and some advice came too late to matter. I moved into the Pemberton carriage house on a crisp Friday morning in October, exactly 6 weeks after Jason and Hannah had stolen my home. The moving truck that arrived this time was smaller, more elegant, carrying only the belongings I'd decided to keep from my old life. The rest had been sold or donated, shed like an old skin I no longer needed. Mrs. Pemberton had insisted on being there to welcome me, and she stood in the doorway of my new home with a bouquet of flowers from her garden and a smile that felt genuinely warm. "Welcome home, Ruth," she said, and something in my chest loosened at those words. Home. It had been so long since I'd felt like I truly belonged somewhere. The first few days passed in a peaceful haze. I arranged my furniture, planted new herbs in the little garden outside my kitchen window, and took long walks through the estate grounds. The silence was different here than it had been in my old house. Not the silence of loneliness, but the silence of sanctuary. I didn't hear from Jason or Hannah during those first weeks, which wasn't surprising. They'd gotten what they wanted. And I'd proven myself to be a compliant victim who wouldn't cause trouble. They probably thought I was quietly settling into my reduced circumstances, grateful for whatever small mercies they'd allowed me. They were wrong about that, just as they'd been wrong about so many things. The call I'd been waiting for came on a Tuesday evening as I sat on my screened porch, reading a mystery novel and watching the sun set through the oak trees. Ruth. The voice was shaky, uncertain. Hannah. Yes. Ruth, we need to talk. Something terrible has happened. I set down my book and allowed myself a small smile. What's wrong, dear? It's Jason's job. They let him go yesterday. They said it was budget cuts, but Ruth, I think someone said something. Someone spread lies about us. Lies. Such an interesting word choice. That's terrible, Hannah. I'm sure Jason will find something else soon. You don't understand. Her voice cracked with panic. His boss, Mr. Hartwell, he said things. He said that the company couldn't employ people with questionable character, people who would take advantage of vulnerable family members. I made a small sympathetic sound, the kind I perfected during 40 years of dealing with worried parents. And it's not just the job, Hannah continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. Tommy didn't get into Riverside Academy. They said we weren't a good fit for their community. And the Morrison boys' birthday party next month? They uninvited us. Said they were keeping it to a smaller group. The Morrison boy. Elena Morrison's grandson. The social event of the season for families trying to establish their place in the city's hierarchy. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and I was. Sorry that children were caught in the crossfire. Sorry that Hannah was finally learning what it felt like to be excluded and dismissed. Ruth, I think someone is spreading rumors about us. Someone who knows our business, our personal affairs. The accusation hung in the air between us, and I could practically hear her trying to work up the courage to say what she really thought. Hannah, are you suggesting that I would do something like that? No, of course not. But Ruth, we need your help. You know, people, you worked for a lot of important families. Maybe you could put in a good word for us, help clear up these misunderstandings. The audacity of it took my breath away. She wanted me to fix the damage she'd caused by stealing from me. I'm afraid I don't understand what you're asking me to do. Maybe you could call some of your old employers? Tell them that Jason's a good person, that we're good people, that whatever they heard isn't true. I stood up and walked to the edge of my porch, looking out over the beautifully maintained gardens that were now part of my daily view. Hannah, what exactly do you think they heard? Silence stretched across the phone line. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. That we took your house. That we stole from you. Did you? Ruth, you know it wasn't like that. We had your best interests at heart. The house was too big for you, too much responsibility. We were trying to help you. I thought about my yellow kitchen, about the rose garden I'd tended with such care, about the spare bedroom I'd decorated for grandchildren who were now forbidden from visiting me. Help me, I repeated slowly. By selling my home without my permission and putting me in a one-bedroom apartment. You got your share of the money. My share. Of my own house. Hannah was crying now, ugly sobs that made her words hard to understand. Ruth, please. I know we made mistakes, but we're family. Families forgive each other. Families help each other. Family. The word she'd weaponized against me for 5 years, used to justify every cruel slight, every deliberate exclusion. Hannah, I said, my voice gentle but final, you made your choice about what kind of family we were going to be. You decided I was disposable. You decided my feelings didn't matter. You decided that what I worked for my entire life was yours to take. But we need you now. Yes, I said simply. You do. I hung up before she could say anything else. The next call came 3 hours later. Jason this time, his voice tight with anger and desperation. Mom, what the hell did you do? I moved to a lovely new home, dear. Thank you for asking. Don't play games with me. Hannah said you talked to her tonight. She said you basically admitted to sabotaging us. I settled back into my comfortable reading chair, the one I'd reupholstered myself all those years ago, now perfectly at home in my new living room. I admitted to no such thing, Jason. I simply declined to help you fix problems that you created. We didn't create anything. Someone is spreading lies about us. And you're the only person who would know enough about our private business to do damage like this. What lies exactly? You know what lies. Actually, I don't. Why don't you tell me what people are saying about you? A long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more defeated. They're saying we stole your house. They're saying we manipulated you and took advantage of you. They're saying we're the kind of people who would rob their own family. And is any of that untrue? Mom, you know we didn't steal from you. We gave you your share of the money. Your share. Those were Hannah's exact words 6 weeks ago. My share of my own house. It was our house too. I was on the deed. Because I trusted you. Because I loved you. Because I wanted to make sure you were taken care of if something happened to me. Jason was quiet for so long I thought he might have hung up. Mom, he finally said. His voice small and young, like the little boy he'd been before Hannah taught him to see me as a burden. I lost my job. We can't make the mortgage payments on the new house without my salary. The new house? Of course. They'd bought a bigger place with the money from selling mine. Probably something in a prestigious neighborhood where Hannah could play queen bee with the other social climbing wives. That's unfortunate, son. We might lose everything. You already lost everything that mattered. What's that supposed to mean? I looked around my beautiful new home, at the life I was building for myself among people who valued loyalty and integrity, people who understood that how you treat the vulnerable says everything about your character. It means that respect, once lost, is almost impossible to get back. Trust, once broken, rarely heals completely. You chose money over family, Jason. You chose Hannah's ambitions over your mother's well-being. Those choices have consequences. So you did do this. You destroyed us. No, son. You destroyed yourselves. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences. I hung up and turned off my phone, then sat in the gathering darkness, thinking about the strange turns my life had taken. 2 months ago, I'd been a lonely old woman clinging to the illusion that my son loved me, desperate for whatever scraps of affection he and his wife were willing to throw my way. I'd been so afraid of losing them that I'd accepted years of casual cruelty, convinced myself that being ignored was better than being alone. Now I was alone by choice and I'd never been happier. The next morning brought a letter in the mail, handwritten on expensive stationery. The return address made my heart skip. Morrison. Inside was a brief note from Elena Morrison, written in her elegant script. Dear Ruth, I thought you should know that word has reached me about certain young people attempting to repair their damaged reputation by blaming their troubles on others. Such behavior only confirms what the community has already concluded about their character. I hope you are settling in well at the Pemberton estate. Some of us remember the value of loyalty. Warmly, Elena. Enclosed with the note was a newspaper clipping from the society page, a photo of Elena Morrison and several other prominent women at a charity luncheon. The caption mentioned their discussion of the importance of supporting elderly community members who have given so much of their lives in service to others. The message was clear. I was under the protection of people who mattered in this city, people who remembered kindness and repaid it in full. That evening, as I watered my herbs in the dying light, I saw a familiar car pull into the main driveway of the estate. Hannah's pink Mini Cooper, looking small and cheap against the backdrop of the Pemberton mansion. She got out of the car slowly, looking around like she couldn't quite believe where she was. She dressed up for this visit, wearing a designer dress I recognized from one of her social media posts, but she looked diminished somehow, like a woman playing a role she was no longer sure she could pull off. Mrs. Pemberton met her at the front door, and even from my porch I could see the polite but cool reception Hannah received. They talked for several minutes, Hannah gesturing animatedly while Mrs. Pemberton listened with the kind of patient attention she might give to a confused child. Finally, Mrs. Pemberton pointed toward my carriage house, and Hannah's shoulders sagged in apparent defeat. She walked slowly down the path, her high heels clicking against the stones, while Mrs. Pemberton watched from her doorway like a protective guardian. When Hannah knocked on my door, I took my time answering. She stood there looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, her perfect makeup streaked with tears, her carefully styled hair beginning to come undone. Ruth, she said, her voice breaking on my name. Please. We need to talk. I stood in my doorway for a long moment, looking at Hannah Carson, The woman who had spent 5 years systematically dismantling my relationship with my son. She looked so different from the confident social climber who had walked into my house 2 months ago to tell me they'd sold my home. This Hannah was desperate, broken, stripped of the careful polish she'd used like armor. "Come in," I said finally, stepping aside. She walked into my living room on unsteady legs, her eyes taking in the comfortable furniture, the flowers Mrs. Pemberton had given me, the books arranged on built-in shelves, the view of the gardens through tall windows. "This is beautiful," she whispered. And there was such longing in her voice that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Thank you. Can I get you some tea?" She shook her head, sinking into the chair across from mine without being invited. "Ruth, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to fix this." "Fix what?" "Everything." She gestured helplessly, tears streaming down her face. "Jason hasn't found another job. The mortgage company is threatening foreclosure. Tommy's teacher asked me if there were problems at home because he's been acting out at school. The other mothers at pickup don't talk to me anymore. It's like we've been marked somehow, like everyone knows." I poured myself a cup of tea from the pot I'd prepared earlier, taking my time, letting her words hang in the air between us. "Everyone knows what, Hannah? That we took your house. That we're the kind of people who would steal from their own family. Are you?" She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "Ruth, you have to understand. When I married Jason, I thought I was getting a different life. His family had money, education, connections. I grew up poor, really poor. My father worked construction when he could get work. My mother cleaned houses. I was the first person in my family to go to college." I sipped my tea and said nothing. I just wanted to give my children what I never had. Security. Social standing. A future where they wouldn't have to worry about money or fitting in, or whether people would accept them. "And you thought that justified taking everything I'd worked for?" I thought. She stopped, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I thought you were old. I thought you didn't need much anymore. I thought it would be easy for you to adjust to something smaller, simpler. You thought I was disposable." Hannah flinched like I'd slapped her. "No. That's not how I saw it. Hannah, 2 months ago you told me I'd already lived my life. You said it like I was already dead and just taking up space." She was crying harder now, her careful composure completely shattered. "I was wrong. God, Ruth, I was so wrong about everything." I set down my teacup and looked at her. This woman who had orchestrated the theft of my home and the alienation of my son. She wanted forgiveness now, wanted me to wave my hand and make everything better, to call Elena Morrison and the other society matrons and tell them it had all been a misunderstanding. "Hannah, why are you really here?" "Because I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm scared we're going to lose everything. The house, our social connections, Jason's respect for me. I'm scared my children are going to grow up knowing their mother destroyed their family over greed. Your children are innocent in this. They don't deserve to suffer for your choices. But if you could just make a few phone calls, explain that it was all a misunderstanding." "What misunderstanding?" She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "Hannah, you and Jason sold my house without my permission. You pocketed most of the money while putting me in a tiny apartment and telling me I should be grateful. Where's the misunderstanding? We gave you money from the sale. A fraction of what the house was worth, from the sale of my own property." I leaned forward, my voice gentle but implacable. "Hannah, if a stranger had done to you what you did to me, what would you call it?" She was silent for a long time, staring down at her hands. "Theft," she finally whispered. "Yes. And now you want me to help you escape the consequences of that theft. You want me to lie to powerful people, to risk my own reputation and relationships, to save you from the results of your own choices. Ruth, please. I know we were wrong. I know we hurt you. But we're family." "No," I said quietly. "We're not." The words seemed to hit her like a physical blow. She doubled over, sobbing so hard that her whole body shook. "Hannah, you made it very clear 2 months ago that I was not part of your family. You told Jason that I was a burden, that I was taking up space that belonged to you and your children. You convinced him that stealing from me was justified because I didn't matter enough to consider. I never said you didn't matter. You didn't have to say it. Every action, every decision, Every cruel little comment over the past 5 years said it for you. She looked up at me through her tears, and for the first time, I saw something like understanding in her eyes. You hate me. I considered that, turning the words over in my mind like stones. Did I hate her? I thought about the woman who had systematically poisoned my relationship with my son, who had made me feel unwelcome in my own family, who had stolen my home and then expected gratitude for it. No, I said finally. I don't hate you, Hannah. Hate requires energy, passion, ongoing emotional investment. What I feel for you is much simpler than that. What? Indifference. She stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. Hannah, you are no longer my problem. Your financial troubles, your social exile, your marriage difficulties, your children's adjustment issues, none of it has anything to do with me anymore. You severed our connection when you decided I was disposable. You can't pick it back up now just because you need something. But Jason is still your son. Jason made his choice. He chose you over me, your wants over my well-being. That was his right as an adult, but choices have consequences. I stood up, smoothing down my skirt, signaling that this conversation was over. Hannah, I want you to leave now. I want you to drive back to your life and figure out how to fix the mess you've made without involving me. And I want you to understand that this is the last time we'll speak. She struggled to her feet, swaying slightly. Ruth, you're condemning us. You're destroying a family. No, dear. You already did that. I walked her to the door, watching as she stumbled down the stone path toward her little pink car. Mrs. Pemberton was no longer visible in her doorway, but I had no doubt she'd been watching, ready to intervene if necessary. Hannah turned back once before getting into her car, her face streaked with makeup and tears, looking like a woman who'd finally understood the true cost of her choices. I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete, absolute peace. Over the next few weeks, I heard bits and pieces about Jason and Hannah's downward spiral through the social network of domestic workers who still kept in touch with me. They'd lost their new house to foreclosure. Jason had taken a job at a much smaller accounting firm for half his previous salary. Hannah had been forced to enroll Tommy in public school and get a part-time job at a department store. They'd moved into a small apartment across town, the kind of place I'd been expected to accept gracefully when they stole my home. I felt no satisfaction in their suffering, but I felt no guilt about it either. They were simply reaping what they had sown. My own life, meanwhile, bloomed like the garden outside my kitchen window. Mrs. Pemberton introduced me to her circle of friends, women who appreciated my experience with children and my discretion with family matters. Several of them hired me for occasional babysitting, paying me more for a weekend with their grandchildren than Hannah had ever offered for months of unpaid childcare. Elena Morrison invited me to join her book club, a gathering of influential women who discussed literature, but also kept each other informed about community matters. They treated me not as hired help, but as an equal, someone whose opinions mattered and whose friendship was valued. For my 61st birthday, they threw me a small party in Mrs. Pemberton's garden, complete with flowers and cake and gifts chosen with thoughtful care. I couldn't remember the last time anyone had celebrated my birthday. Jason certainly hadn't acknowledged it in years. As autumn turned to winter, I settled into routines that felt natural and fulfilling. Morning coffee on my screened porch, even in the cold, wrapped in a warm blanket and watching the sun rise over the estate. Afternoon walks through the gardens with Mrs. Pemberton, discussing books and current events and plans for spring planting. Evenings spent reading or knitting or simply enjoying the profound quiet of a life lived on my own terms. I thought about Jason sometimes, wondered if he ever missed the mother who had raised him alone, who had worked multiple jobs to give him opportunities she'd never had herself. I wondered if he ever realized what he'd lost when he chose Hannah's ambitions over our relationship. But I didn't reach out. I didn't send birthday cards or Christmas presents or awkward texts trying to bridge the gap between us. That chapter of my life was closed, and I had no interest in reopening it. On New Year's Eve, as snow fell softly outside my windows, I sat in my comfortable living room with a glass of champagne and my favorite book, thinking about the year that had passed. 12 months ago, I'd been a lonely, desperate woman, clinging to the hope that my son might someday value me the way I'd always valued him. Now I was surrounded by genuine friendship, living in a beautiful home, contributing my skills and experience to families who appreciated me, And most importantly, I was free. Free from the obligation to smile while being mistreated. Free from the fear of abandonment that had made me accept crumbs when I deserved a feast. Free from the crushing weight of trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. As the clock struck midnight, I raised my glass to my reflection in the dark window and whispered the words that had become my personal motto. Some bridges are meant to be burned. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in pristine white, like a fresh start, like a clean slate, like the beginning of a life finally lived for the right reasons. I was 61 years old and I had never been happier.